President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses, who's out of the country. I have not yet received the instrument of appointment, so that when I do, I will ask to revert to this item on the order paper. May I also welcome today the students of the Bethesda Government Primary School of Tobago, and I ask you to welcome.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The consolidated audited financial statements of the Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended September 31st, financial years ended September 31st, 2009 to 2015, and the consolidated audited financial statements of the National Flour Mills Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2018. Thank you, Madam President.
Reports from committees, urgent questions, questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the government is pleased to announce that it will be answering question number 186, 187, and 261. We ask for a 2-week deferral of the following: question number 198, question number 259, question number 273. We also would like to inform this Honorable Senate that under written questions, even though it is not due as yet, we will be submitting the answer to question number 296. 296.
Mark? Yes?
Yeah, Madam President, having regard to the fact that Parliament is going to recess at the end of the first week in July, and you having approved, that is the President, these questions for all these months, I find it very difficult to accept.
Mark, I thought you wanted clarification on something.
Yeah, I want a clarification on this question about deferring questions after questions after questions. And I think that you have to rule on this matter, having regard.
Senator Mark, as you very well, as you should be aware, the questions that are due for answer, I can defer them for 14 days under the standing orders. Remember, there is a time after the recess when the session will still be alive, so that, you know, it is completely within the standing orders to allow the extension. So, honorable senators, I will defer question 198 for 2 weeks. Senator Mark?
Question 186 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this question startled me because, Madam President, I have heard so much about a highway from Wallerfield to Sandy Grande, that we were building it in the bush and all kind of thing, and why we wasting money to build a highway. Madam President, we are building a highway to Sandy Grande simply because the demand on the Eastern Main Road exceeds the supply, and there's very little that can be done to improve capacity in this area. However, until that highway to Sandy Grande is completed, the traffic management branch of the ministry is liaising with the TTPS and the municipal police in the area to improve enforcement of indiscriminatory parking, loading and offloading of goods vehicles, illegal vending. Furthermore, the Pure Unit and NITCO are engaged in the infrastructure project at present that will assist the mobility in the Sandy Grande area and environment. The people in the Eastern Seaboard can't wait for that highway to reach the Sandy Grande. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Mark?
The value of this highway, I understand, is $400 million. Can you tell us when you expect it to be completed?
Minister.
Madam President, again, in the astute leadership of the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, segments of this highway will be delivered to the people of the Eastern Seaboard sometime next year. I thank you.
Senator Mark?
Having regard to the fact that squatters have begun to construct in the pathway of this highway, can you tell us, Senate, what action is the government taking to address this matter to avoid any untimely delays?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question. Next question. Any more questions on this? Okay, next question.
Yeah, question 187 to the Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Diamond Village Community Center is not currently on the list of community centers for repairs in fiscal 2019. However, the ministry will assess the conditions of the center and make recommendations for the necessary remedial work to be completed as soon as is practicable.
Senator Mark?
Madam President, is the minister aware that this center is now the homes to rats and snakes and roaches and insects? Are you aware? Don't allow Minister Young to come in here and disturb the proceedings. Yeah, but don't allow him to.
Senator Mark, please ask your question.
Yes, I'm hearing him mumbling while I'm asking.
I'm hearing a lot of mumbling as well. Could you please ask your question?
I'm asking, Madam President, through you, whether the minister is aware that this center, which is under some review, as it is claimed, is now the home to rats and snakes and roaches and insects.
Minister,
and whether...
no, that's one question. Minister?
Madam President, thank you. It seems as though the member is well acquainted with rats and snakes and cockroaches, much more than I am. However, I am not uniquely aware that the center is inhabited by those, although we have quite a few dilapidated centers around the country, and it may well be that the center may be home to vermin, such as the member has described.
Senator Mark?
can the minister indicate why the government has not taken action to get the center properly repaired, having regard to the structure? There's a structure already established. Why has the government not taken action to bring this community center back to its normal, pristine, glory and state as it was founded and established earlier?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it is the wish of the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts that we could, at the same time, deal with all of the over 250 centers in the country. However, this is not practicable. At this point in time, Madam Speaker, I'm glad to report that we have been able to do complete construction and major refurbishment on over 30 centers thus far, with 20 more being in the pipeline in various stages of completion. It all starts with the fact that there's a center that needs attention, and then we assess it in the same way that we have described for the Diamond Village Community Center, and then we get it onto the program as quickly as possible. So therefore, though we may wish to do all centers, and there are many more that may be in need of attention, we cannot do all at the same time, and certainly we will do our best to get to Diamond Center as soon as is practicable.
When does the government intend to conduct an assessment of the center, having regard to the period of time it has been placed in the situation, Madam President, that I earlier described?
I think that was provided in the initial response of the minister, but you have...
Can I ask the minister whether the center has been placed in a zone of discrimination insofar as the PNM is concerned, and hence the reason why there has been no attention paid to this particular exercise?
Senator Mark, that question is not allowed. Next question, Senator Mark.
I thought they have deferred the 198.
Next question.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 261 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Mantra Lodge was acquired on November 19th, 2015. The Sanctuary Resort was acquired in two parts. The first part of the property was acquired on November 17th, 2015, and the second part was acquired on August 8th, 2016. The cost to acquire each property is as follows. Mantra Lodge, $8 million TT. Sanctuary Resort, $24 million TT. No funds have been spent to outfit either property. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Obika.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Can the Minister indicate, having spent in excess of $30 million just in acquisition, what revenue has accrued from such properties as yet?
Minister.
Madam President, no revenue has been earned to date from either property.
Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Can I ask the Honourable Minister if any of the properties are in operation at this time?
Minister.
Madam President, neither property is in operation currently.
Senator Obika.
Can the Honourable Minister indicate if additional monies are required to bring the properties into operation?
Minister.
Madam President, the THA is seeking operators for these properties. As and when those operators are identified and arrangements finalized, a determination will be made as to whether it needs to incur any more money and how much will have to be incurred.
Senator Obika.
Given the importance of tourism to the economy of Tobago, can the Honourable Minister indicate a timeline as to when the THA should acquire such operators?
Minister.
Madam President, the THA is working assiduously on these matters and is trying to conclude this as soon as possible.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name, whereas the responsibility of the government is to ensure public safety and security through the maintenance of law and order, and whereas the government has failed to address the extraordinary increase in the level of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, in particular murders and other violent crimes, which are negatively affecting national peace and economic development, be it resolved that the Senate take note of the government's failure to arrest the increasing and unacceptable levels of criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago, and be it further resolved that this Senate call on the government to table in the shortest possible time a cogent strategic crime prevention plan to address the unacceptable levels of crime facing the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, to begin my contribution, Madam President, I wish to go straight to the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And if we turn to the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, under rights enshrined, Chapter 1 of the Constitution, the recognition and protection of fundamental human rights and freedoms, there are some rights enshrined there, Part 4. And these rights enshrined are critical to analysis of the impact of crime in our country and how it prevents persons from exercising their rights as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Because the first is it's hereby recognized and declared that Trinidad and Tobago, they have existed and shall continue to exist without discrimination by reason of race, origin, color, religion, or sex, the following fundamental human rights and freedoms, namely, A, the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except by due process of law. We can all accept that crime touches this first fundamental enshrined right immediately. The right to life can be snuffed out by murder. The right to liberty, the right to security of the person. Then there's another right, the right of the individual to equality before the law and protection of the law. When we see the Bureau within the police service arresting police officers for what would be fraudulent activity, we understand that if we don't maintain vigilance, we can have this right to protection of the law being further eroded. The right of the individual to respect for his private and family life. The right of the individual to equality of treatment from any public authority in the exercise of any functions. The right of a parent or guardian, and this one is very important, Madam President, to provide a school of his own choice for the education of his child or ward. Now, when we consider that there are schools reported that the level of security has been compromised in some form or the other, and we have the MTS looking at ramping up security around certain schools, talk of relocating schools from certain communities where persons have depended on these schools for generations, simply because of security concerns, we can understand that this right of a parent or guardian to provide a school of their own choice is also being eroded. Freedom of movement, Madam President. We are aware of the borderlines that exist. King Austin, that famous calypsonian from Trinidad and Tobago, his son, Mr. King, sang that song of borderline, you know? And that song of borderline is a reality for persons living in certain communities. We don't have garrison communities here in Trinidad, Madam President, where the borderlines are clearly defined. But we have communities where there are borderlines. And to the persons who can or cannot cross those borderlines, the definition comes when someone is shot after they have crossed such a borderline. So to the young person living on the hill, I don't need to call the name of the hill because we don't want to continue stigmatizing, but we know we are speaking of living on the hill and wanting to participate in the city of Port of Spain, they may have to cross several borderlines and if they are seen to be connected to someone or some activity, they may find that their life may be taken simply for collateral damage. They may have never been involved in crime, Madam President. And that is an issue. Freedom of movement is severely affected by crime in this country. Freedom of thought and expression and freedom of the press. Now, a simple example. Journalists went to, on a public road across from a business in South Trinidad, and stones were hurled at them. This is connection with AV drilling. And you find that these journalists were only doing what is expected of their profession. They were carrying the story of the day. That was the allegation of corruption regarding reporting of fiscalized oil by AV drilling. And they found that they were under attack by persons who allegedly were connected to AV drilling. The issue is, this may seem as a simple scenario, but Madam President, can you imagine if every time a journalist goes to report on an issue where someone may be implicated and stones are thrown at them or shots are fired at them, you can imagine that the freedom of the press will be no more. So I start on that point. What are the rights of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? And what is the impact? This motion seeks to look at the impact of crime and the failure of the government to address the issue of crime and criminality. And finally, to have a cogent plan to address the situation. In Trinidad and Tobago, persons have come to a conclusion that we are not safe. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in terms of theory of human behavior, Madam President, speaks to what are the expectations of a human being. And safety is one of the basic needs of a human being in any society. The primary requirement at the bottom of such a pyramid for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago is their safety and security. When people consider as recent as the 3rd of May 2019, just last month, the news there had to report a schoolgirl being killed in Big Yard in a shootout. We are not safe. When the public considers that this schoolgirl was shot and killed as a result of a shootout reportedly between police officers and gunmen, it shows that if this report is true, even the police service do not have a handle on the crime situation. It may mean that they are under-resourced. The police commissioner is on record as stating the financing that is required for the performance of their duties is not being given to the police officers of Trinidad and Tobago. Give the police service the money they require, the resources they require to do the job that they need. So the people are clear under this PNM regime, this particular incarnation, Madam President, that we are not safe. The media headlines bear the truth. In Trinidad and Tobago today, there's an extraordinary increase in the levels of crime and criminality. Murders and violent crimes are spiraling beyond control. Trinidad and Tobago has known no peace since this regime has come into government. Madam President, I want to share with you a report regarding the ammunition control practices in Latin America and the Caribbean from the UN LIREC document 2018. On page 9 of that document, as per imports, and I quote, as per imports, UN Comtrade shows that between 2014 and 2016, almost all countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, 27 nations, imported some ammunition. though many did so at small levels. Nonetheless, the following countries imported and reported at least US $1 million in ammunition during the period. Argentina, 9.5 million US. Brazil, 21.3 million. Chile, 10 million. Colombia, 8.4. Costa Rica, 2.8. Dominican Republic, 1.36. Ecuador, 1.1. El Salvador, 2 million. Guatemala, 7.4. Mexico, 39.4. Peru, 4.9. And Uruguay, 1.6. Madam President, missing from that list, from that UN agency, is Venezuela. And we may find it difficult to accept that. But we understand how reporting goes. And whilst there may not be a report of imports from Venezuela, it may not mean that there were none. So the report continues, and I quote, in the same period, that is between 2014 and 2016, in the same period, Venezuela did not report any imports, but export reports from third countries show that Venezuela received at least US $4 million in ammunition. Madam President, over 28 million TT dollars in ammunition Venezuela received. In that 2-year period, we are not talking about 2019, 2014 to 2016. The situation in Venezuela, as far as security, was not as fluid as it is now. It was tighter, one can assume, one can expect. But right now, we can understand, because of the mass exodus, roughly 10% of the population leaving to neighboring countries, some of which are here with us in Trinidad and Tobago, we can expect that the security situation is not as tight as it was 2014 to 2016. So Venezuela is listed in this report, this 2018 report, as reflecting a receipt of US $4 million in ammunition from the neighboring countries. Now, Madam President, the police commissioner is on record as expressing concern with regard to the numbers of Venezuelan, not citizens, but the numbers of criminal elements that are hiding among the Venezuelan community. They are honest and decent persons from Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago has had a wave of immigrants from Venezuela as part of our history, tied to political unrest. This is a fact of history, Madam President. But what is a fact of today's story, the period now, is that there are many criminal elements hiding among the persons coming from Venezuela. So a very important part of the government's plan must involve how do you treat with the criminal elements from Venezuela. And what the people are saying is that they are not seeing that the government understands the problem to begin, if they understand that there is a problem in the first place, and they are not addressing the problem, obviously. The anti-gang bill, Madam President, I want to move on to another aspect of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, the anti-gang bill. Now, the PNM regime would have the country believe, would have had the country believe at the beginning of 2018, at the end of 2017, that every crime, every murder that was committed, the blood is on the hands of the UNC because they did not support the anti-gang bill. They would have had the population believe that. The problem is the anti-gang bill was passed. The murder rate increased. The statistics that the Honorable Attorney General brought to the Parliament bears that truth out. The anti-gang bill, legislation without implementation is but wasted effort. Madam President, vision without action is but a dream. And when there is action without vision, it's time wasted. What this government is engaging in is time wasting when it comes to solving crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, The Minister of National Security, Madam President, I couldn't believe it when I heard it myself. The Minister of National Security came to this House, and on the question of the anti-gang bill, volunteered information. The minister said that he meets with the heads of the national security apparatus every week. At that time, there were 23 weeks passed in the year, and he only found 5 persons to be charged. They could have only charged 5 persons on the anti-gang bill, from the minister's own admission. I don't know if there was a taxi gang. We found 5 fellas in a car and said, well, this is the taxi gang, and we lay 5 charges on you. When this government is on record as saying they know where the hundreds of gang members are, they know their houses, they know where they live, they know where they lime, they know where they sell their narcotics, they know where they have their guns. But you can only find 5 charges. I don't know if it was 5 fellas sweating on a corner or 5 fellas in a taxi. All right? So Madam President, I'm hearing some protests from the Minister of Trade and Industry.
She may contribute.
And I have a part that affects the Minister of Trade, because we can understand why there's not much economic activity. Because crime affects business directly. Crime affects investment directly. Now, if one turns to the Inter-American Development Bank, because I really want the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry to understand why, when the minister comes to this Parliament in a budget debate or media review, cannot account for any increases or any improvement in the real economy, apart from the energy sector. And a significant part of that, one is lack of ideas with regard to the cabinet itself, but a significant part of that is the cost of crime and violence. And the Inter-American Development Bank, in a publication titled The Costs of Crime and Violence, New Evidence and Insights in Latin America and the Caribbean, by Laura Jitman as editor, made some pronouncements. I believe this was in 2018. I stand to be corrected, where they estimated the direct costs of crime and violence. And they categorized 3 types of costs, Madam President. The social costs of crime, which include the costs of victimization in terms of quality of life loss due to homicides and other violent crimes, and the foregone income of the prison population. Because if you have a prison population of 1,000 or 500, and those persons aren't being able to be productive members of society, then of course you lose an opportunity for output. You lose an opportunity to improve your gross domestic product. You lose the skills that those persons have. And then there are many persons on remand because the criminal justice system has broken down. Where if there were speedy trials, they would have gotten their sentencing quicker. They may have spent less time incarcerated, or they may have been acquitted earlier. The costs incurred by the private sector, which include the expenditure of firms and households on crime prevention, namely spending on security services. Now, Madam President, if you are in the business of distribution, your business is cash-based, you are low-hanging fruit for crime and criminal elements. You may be going well. Your margins may be just enough to pay your rent, pay your workers, and give you some basic return on your investment. But the moment you are hit by crime, the amount you have to invest in that very business, it may make it uneconomical to remain in the business in the first place. So the impact on business is significant. And then there's costs incurred by the government, which include public spending on the judiciary system, police services, and administration of prisons. You can't put a police in every household. So there were some statistics regarding income losses due to incarceration. And the total spending was in millions of dollars. And the average for Trinidad and Tobago, if I were to gross this in US, is about 2 million TT, which is 0.33 million US. per annum. I think this is income loss due to incarceration. So this may seem small because income loss due to incarceration is but a small part of the pie. All right? Sorry. And income loss due to incarceration as a percent of GDP is projected to be 0.14% in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, why do I put this type of detailed statistics on the record? Because I'm indicating to the government that unless your solutions to crime are data-driven, you are but wasting time, as you have done for the last 4 years in government. So the anti-gang bill was a total failure because the government has no idea about implementation. Their announcement strong, implementation weak. So there's no crime prevention plan. What, Madam President, is this administration's plan? One could ask the question, is the plan to attack anyone who has a dissenting view? Kirkwaite of fixing TNT, if he decides to criticize the government, that he is unpatriotic? The Media Association, Madam President, it is laughable that when the Media Association brings out a press release, instead of acknowledging that it is from the association, individuals from the association are then singled out by the administration, as if the individual, be it the secretary or the PRO, were the ones who penned the opinion. It is the opinion of the association, not the individual. Now, can you imagine this administration, Madam President, is thinking about, and to me this is reprehensible to the highest level, thinking about stopping protests outside Parliament, stopping the masses from protesting because they want to speak truth to power. That goes against the grain of what we stand for here. In 1903, Madam President, the Ratepayers Association burnt down the Red House. There was a massive protest outside the Legislative Assembly at that time, in what we now call Woodford Square. All right? And do you know that 16 people died that day? 5 women, 11 men, and 51 others were injured because they were speaking truth to the colonial power. We had no representatives from amongst the people in the Legislative Assembly. Now, those 16 souls that died, they died standing for the rights that are enshrined in our Constitution today. They stood for the rights of every citizen. So they burned down the Red House. They burned it down that day, and they got representatives from the people, for the people, to sit in the Red House and to make laws that are not disadvantageous to the public interest. So when you can have, Madam President, an administration looking at protests outside the people's chamber, this is the people's space. I want to go on to a Joint Select Commission inquiry report, Madam President. This is the third report of the Joint Select Committee on the National Security, second session, 2016-2017, of the 11th Parliament on an inquiry into the operations of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center and the issue of DNA sampling in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, microscopy. We have ballistics testing. At the core of ballistics testing is the practice of microscopy, defined as the capacity to match a spent shell or projectile, the part that leaves the shell when a gun is discharged, to match it to the weapon that has so discharged it. So every time a weapon comes to the Forensic Science Center, they must match the foot or the footprint, the fingerprint. The microscopy is recorded which gun discharged the projectile, and they have it registered, or should have it registered, in some database. Madam President, would you know that there are only 2 microscopes? I hope the government can come and see that they've ordered a heap of them and that they've increased the staff complement. Anything short of that, they should not even touch that part of their contribution in this debate. Unless you are fixing the problem at the Forensic Science Center, you can bring laws from now until the next 10 years. The problem of ballistics testing will remain, the backlog will remain, and the bottleneck will remain, and you will not have convictions. So there are a number of issues engaged the attention of the committee. And Madam President, these are the recommendations. And unless the government seeks to address these recommendations in their contribution, they shouldn't touch the Forensic Science Center. 1, operational improvements at the Forensic Science Center, including reduction of the backlog of DNA tests, narcotics, homicides, and ballistics. The accreditation of the Forensic Science Center and its laboratory services under the International Standards Organization and International Electrotechnical Commission. The efficient implementation of the DNA Act and the introduction of effective methods of DNA sampling. Accommodation issues and staff shortages at the Forensic Science Center. They are short-staffed. They are very short-staffed, and they are lacking equipment. A DNA data bank and the need for regulations to support are important. Now, Madam President, specifically now, employment of at least 4 additional qualified firearm examiners with extensive work experience, not OJTs. OJTs are good so that they can learn from the experts, but don't count them in the establishment. You add them to the establishment. Procurement of scientific equipment, including 2 more comparison microscopes. Madam President, do you know what the total cost of that? It's less than the cost of the Mercedes-Benz bought by the Prime Minister, $2 million. Adequate allocation and timely releases of funds. So finally, on ballistics, Madam President, effective intelligence leads not only to convictions, but also creates broader intelligence for law enforcement, enabling proactive and not reactive responses. So for $2 million, cheaper than the paintings bought, they can reduce the backlog of ballistics testing in Trinidad and Tobago. They can improve the conviction rate for firearms offenses, and they can help solve the problem of crime. $2 million apparently is too much. So, Madam President, a crime plan must also be rooted in a regional approach. We belong to a Caribbean civilization, and the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament, and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, LIRC, gave some recommendations for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I took but 7 of those. Number 1, invest in political capital, in the creation of global political will for greater ammunition controls. But, Madam President, when we have so much faux pas in the realm of diplomatic corps in this country, because at the head of the service, you don't seem to understand in the cabinet the importance of foreign policy, you will always have problems. When you have a minister who acts as the de facto Minister of Foreign Affairs when he is not even in the ministry, you know we are talking about the Minister of National Security. He has overstepped his bounds. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is a very exacting job, and the person who fulfills that role must fulfill it without having to worry about another cabinet colleague overreaching where he doesn't belong. Batting a crease, that's the Minister of National Security. Another point, Madam President.
I'm going to ask you to desist from that line, please, because you are... Please, just desist.
I wish that there is a better synergy amongst the cabinet members so that they can understand the importance of foreign affairs as a portfolio. Another recommendation is to consider pushing for the creation of new international instruments and plugging the holes in the ones already exist. fully implement obligations and commitments regarding ammunition under existing international instruments. So therefore, foreign affairs must have a pride and place in your national crime prevention strategy. Ensure whole-of-government approach to ammunition control. It's a word that this government likes to announce, but does not implement. Install a culture of restraint when it comes to all aspects of ammunition. Tackle ammunition diversion from government stockpiles as urgent priority, and increase transparency in the sector through practice and regulation. Madam President, crime and criminality has crippled the economy. The economic development has been put on the back burner. There are businessmen who are feeling the hurt. And none other than the Prime Minister admitted that crime is having a negative impact on the economy. The Prime Minister is on record, for 102 FM, CNC3, as stating that crime is seeming to be out of control. I'm paraphrasing. In an article on 12th July 2018, titled Prime Minister and PM on Crime, Dr. Rowley admitted that current anti-crime measures are inefficient. Madam President, if it wasn't in black and white, I couldn't have said it. Dr. Rowley admitted that current anti-crime measures are inefficient. This is 12 July 2018, less than a year ago. And I quote him, "The government of Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for the state of the country, especially in this particular case, where so many citizens, so many communities without prompting will tell you that their concern is crime." Now, when you even go to the increasing levels of criminality, and you consider April, just April, was considered to be the bloodiest month in our history in terms of murders, you know that we have already passed over the slope. We have gone beyond the precipice. And there's an article titled "April Exploded into a Bloodbath" by Fane Richards that states 49 persons were murdered in just 30 days, representing a 25% increase over the 39 people killed in April 2018. And this is according to the TTPS. Now, April exploded into a bloodbath by Darius Figueroa. There's another issue of crime and the economy. Whenever the economy is experiencing a downturn or stagnation, so there was a significant downturn, significant recession, now we are going through stagnation. When you are going through such a significant level of economic hardship as we are in this country, crime generally spikes. So the government's focus should not be to mouth that they're not going to the IMF, because they're already implementing a lot of the measures from the IMF. What the government should have been doing is giving citizens the assurance that they have a stake in this country. But how can they do that? How can the citizens feel they have a stake in this country when all they see at the highest levels, because morality begins at the top, all they see at the highest levels are persons fattening and feathering their nest, using the law to do so. So they increase their pensions significantly. Who is going home with 600,000, who's going home with 1.6 million, who's going home with 1.9 million? So they feather their nests, and the poor man is under pressure. So Madam President, I want to end where I began. Unless this government is coming to us to tell us how, in fact, they are going to fix the problems that the people are facing, they shouldn't venture into this debate. Unless they're going to describe how they're going to fix the problem of the right to individual life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof, except by the due process of law, they shouldn't contribute to this debate. If all the government is going to do is talk about what happened 5 years ago, get over it. You're supposed to be in government. I'm saying supposed to be because if you are in government and all you are talking about is the past, it means that you are getting ready to leave office. But the problem is the people of Trinidad and Tobago have to bear the months until you make that decision. Madam President, unless the government is coming to describe how the right of the individual to equality before the law and protection of the law is going to be fixed, they should not contribute to this debate. And there's a scenario I want to paint. Regularly, going home, I would pass through the community of Point 14. I'd visit with friends and so on. But now, because of the significant influx of criminal elements from Venezuela, in fact, the notorious gang leader who was found with significant levels of ammunition, a cache of ammunition. He had some significant level of guns and so on. Bombs is the word, but I can't remember the grenades. Grenades, Madam President. Where persons in Point 40 might be accustomed to the little one-shooter to go hunting, to catch guti and lapa and deer and so on. This man came in with high-powered rifles, brand new, high-powered rifles, grenades and the like. And this person was hiding in the community of Warden Road in Point 14, where this regime is having their political meeting on Thursday. But they are not seeking to address the problem of the criminal elements that are coming in, infiltrating in our communities, and they are making a bad problem worse. So communities where before I could have gone out at night, take a walk, be comfortable and free, now you don't see persons doing that at all, because the level of criminality that we are being met with, the police service has no match for. So now, Madam President, the government has reached the twilight of their existence. They have spent 4 years in office. They have wasted time. They have failed to fix the issue of crime and impact on the school system, safety of students at school, access to students to schools that are safe. They have failed to address the issue of borderlines that affect some communities where crime and criminality is high, at a high level. They have failed to look at the push factors. The push factors in communities where we had community policing, we had comfort patrols and so on. We had persons in communities who had access to opportunity. And this was even under a prior PNM regime. The partnership government expanded the opportunities. But even under a prior PNM regime, but everything from that regime they want no part of. So where you had youth in communities getting access to training and development opportunities so that they can find a different path for their life. Because the whole issue of fixing crime is giving persons a proper value for life and for liberty. And unless you bring actions, yes, you can have the stick, but where is the carrot? All this government is looking for is legislative big sticks, because on the ground, the police force will tell you the vehicles aren't working, this isn't operational, the cameras we heard yesterday aren't working, and so on. So you have legislative big stick, failure operationally, and no carrot, no incentive to keep persons on the straight and narrow, to improve their view on the value of life and liberty of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. What this government should have come from the very beginning is to look at those push factors. Where you have communities where persons are getting involved in crime, try to fix it by fixing the people so that they would not make the decision to enter crime, that they would make the decision to be productive contributors to our society. And I want to leave on this point. We are a society, Madam President, made up of immigrants, many of whom did not choose to come here. We are here. We have chosen to stay here. Therefore, we are all vested with an interest in the progress and advancement of our country. Every citizen of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. What the government has been doing is sidelining persons who can contribute.
Senator Obika, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, I'm wrapping up now. The government has sidelined persons who can contribute, and they have created an environment where all that pervades is despair. All that pervades is despair. And the government must rethink its entire approach to crime. Reformation and legislation alone will not fix operational inefficiencies. I thank you.
Someone needs to second the motion.
Thank you, Madam President. I beg to second this motion, and I will reserve my time to speak later in the debate.
The motion has been seconded by Senator Amin. Honourable Senators, I will now propose the question for debate. The question is, whereas the responsibility of a government is to ensure public safety and security through the maintenance of law and order, and whereas the government has failed to address the extraordinary increase in the level of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, in particular murders and other violent crimes, which are negatively affecting national peace and economic development. Be it resolved that the Senate take note of the government's failure to arrest the increasing and unacceptable levels of criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago, and be it further resolved that this Senate call on the government to table in the shortest possible time a cogent strategic crime prevention plan to address the unacceptable levels of crime facing the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, as always, I appreciate the privilege to contribute in the Senate. Madam President, at the outset, I'd like to speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago through the Senate and just inform them that once again, this motion is ill-advised and inaccurate. We start off, it was interesting to hear Senator Obika talk about the need for data and data-driven policy and the importance of data and statistics. As the draftsperson of the motion, he obviously failed to consider data and statistics when he talked about addressing the extraordinary increase in the level of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, I start by debunking that and letting the people of Trinidad and Tobago know a couple of things. First of all, to deal with issues of national security and to deal effectively with the fight against crime and to have an effective national security apparatus, Madam President, there is a certain amount of stealth that is needed. There's a certain amount of confidentiality that is needed. Because you see, this administration, working with the current holders of posts in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, or Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, and our intelligence services, guards very jealously the information and the intelligence to ensure the success of operations. This administration does not believe in going at the top of a mountain before the launch of operations to say exactly how we intend to deal with crime. We prefer to let the effects and the effectiveness of what is being done be seen. So I'd start off by using the latest CAPA information. This is the data from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service of today's date. And it's quite interesting. One of the, if you would permit me, one of the litmus tests, one of the measurements of crime is serious reported crime. Serious reported crime includes murders, woundings and shootings, rape, incest, other sexual offenses, serious indecency, kidnapping, kidnapping for ransom, burglaries and break-ins, robberies, fraud offenses, general larceny, larceny motor vehicles, larceny dwelling house, narcotic offenses, possession of firearm and ammunition, and any other serious crimes. And I'm happy to report today, Madam President, through you to the population, that from the 1st of January to the 22nd of June, we are down 908 serious reported crimes. So last year at this time, it was 6,620, and this year it's 5,712, a reduction of 908 at half of our year. And I thank the men and women of the police service, our defense force, and our intelligence services for the great work they've done in that reduction. You see, Madam President, crime is very much about perception. And there seems to be a continued effort by certain people in our society to instill fear in the population and to instill fear building into this perception of uncontrollable crime. It's a political football of sorts. Madam President, as everyone in this Senate should be aware, and I'm sure most of the population is, the body charged with the responsibility of dealing with crime, protecting and serving us, the people, is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. They are the ones charged with the responsibility, Madam President, to prevent, detect, investigate, apprehend, charge, and prosecute criminals in this country. A body like the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Madam President, needs leadership. Anyone starting with the tackling of crime, the first thing you would appreciate is the body constitutionally charged with the responsibility of dealing with crime, that is the police service, should have a permanent leader, should have a permanent commissioner of police. Madam Speaker, the record reflects that one of the first things this administration did by December of 2015, I actually believe it was in November of 2015, we had revised the order for the appointment of a permanent commissioner of police. And it's important that the population understand why that was done. Because previously, Madam President, it was a very complicated and complex process to appoint a commissioner of police. You had to use a foreign university. They had to do the evaluation, the advertising. There were a number of very complex procedures. And that is why this country, the only commissioner of police ever appointed under that regime, that order, was Commissioner Dwayne Gibbs and his deputy commissioner of police, 2 Canadians. But you see, Madam President, by 2012, they had been unceremoniously dismissed. And from 2012 to 2015, what we, the citizens, heard when we asked, well, why isn't there a permanent commissioner of police? We heard from the Attorney General between 2012 and 2015 say, you don't need a permanent commissioner of police. It's better to have someone acting, because when they're acting, they have to sing for their supper. This administration believed differently, Madam President. And what we did is we sought to make it simpler, to simplify the appointment of a commissioner of police. And you know what happened when we did that? Via an order here in this Parliament. And part of the simplification process was allowing the Minister of National Security to ask the Police Service Commission to begin the recruitment exercise. Immediately upon that order being passed, the opposition went to court, challenged the order, and tied up the whole process. They like to claim victory. It was not a victory. The same way they claim victory in election petitions and they lost.
May I just say that there was silence when the mover of the motion was speaking. There's a response now. I would ask for silence by everyone. Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I expect a lot of grumbling. So what happened? The opposition tied up the appointment of a commissioner of police. I want the population to understand that when the government sought to simplify the process to appoint a commissioner of police, the opposition tried to tie up the process and succeeded to do so for a number of months. But the outcome of the decision was the court simply removed the instigator of the process, being the Minister of National Security, and the process began. And the process worked. There was an evaluation, there was recruitment, and there was a shortlisting. And we came to Parliament to debate who should be the next Commissioner of Police, Madam President. And those on the other side, in that other place, decided they wanted to keep the same, they wanted to keep the status quo. So the only one person that they would support in that whole list of shortlisted persons was the office holder who was acting from 2012 come forward. The country knows what this government did. In an unprecedented move, this government decided to operate on the basis of merit. And this government appointed, for the first time since 2012, with a simplified process, a commissioner of police in the form of Mr. Gary Griffith. former National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, former Minister of National Security, who, to his credit, was fired from the cabinet for standing up against an Attorney General who is now before the criminal courts with 2 sets of criminal charges against his name. Well done, Mr. Griffith. Enters a Commissioner of Police. So, Madam President, what then happens? That's only part of the process. Immediately, the country knows that the whole morale in the police service was lifted. You now had an energetic person, someone who's thinking outside of the box, someone who's dynamic. What did the government do? The government then moved to ensure multi-agency work and intelligence-driven operations. All of the operations being driven now are being driven by intelligence, Madam President. Multi-agency, what that means to the population is I've got the police, the defense force, or intelligence services, the prison services, immigration, and also some other units to sit at the table. And I heard Senator Obika saying how I talk about every week I meet with the heads. Yes, every week I meet with the heads, sometimes more than once a week. And what has that achieved? That simple process plus the use of technology, it is now one banded unit. So the government has begun tackling crime through the use of multi-agency task force for everything. And immediately we began to see the results, Madam President. Simple fact of sharing intelligence and information, because everyone is sitting at the table. Everyone now shares very openly at the table the intelligence to drive the operations as they all sit and plan the operations together. And I can assure the people of Trinidad and Tobago that that is working. We appointed under our tenure 3 Chief of Defense Staffs. The last 2 I've had the pleasure of working closely with. Rear Admiral Pritchard, Hayden Pritchard, did a tremendous job. We then took another decision in the appointment of the current Chief of Defense Staff to choose someone who would be in the position and post for a number of years and not the most senior person. The reason for that, I tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago, was to give the Chief of Defense Staff, who was in the same batch as the Commissioner of Police, who is in the same batch as our current Director of the Intelligence Services, an opportunity to work together. And we're seeing the effects of that. When I say the same batch, all of them entered the Defense Force at the same time. And that simple but very strategic and well thought out decision has begun to reap rewards for Trinidad and Tobago in the fight against crime. Another thing that we did, we rebuilt the relationships with foreign partners. I heard the mockery and the suggestion that I should stay in my crease and not do, but I am tasked by the Prime Minister, and he's the only one that can task me. And from very early in the term, Madam President, we set about rebuilding the relationships with our foreign partners. And I'll tell you something. And I'll tell you something about the U.S. The U.S. early in the term told the Prime Minister and myself at the highest levels, they did not trust those who were there before. And they would not share information with those who were there before. And that is the truth, Madam President. And Madam President, we set about rebuilding those relationships. And I'm happy to report now that we have free flow of intelligence, free flow of information, we have free flow of training by all of those agencies with Trinidad and Tobago, something that did not exist before. It simply did not exist. When we sat in the room, and I sat in the room with the DEA, the FBI, and other bodies, they said they had gone into a very dark patch in Trinidad's history, and they did not know who to speak to. They did not know who they could trust, and they just stopped sharing information altogether. I am happy to report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, those days are over, and we now have a free flow of information. And as a test, and a reading pen with a big tick of that, I'm also happy to tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago that just yesterday, the UK Travel Advisory upgraded Trinidad and Tobago and took us off the very likely of terrorist attacks and told us it is because of all of the work that we've done in close in close proximity with them and the cooperation. So well done, Trinidad and Tobago. The Commissioner of Police, the CDS, and myself went up to London earlier this year in January. We met with all of the intelligence agencies, and they were basically rating us on the work that we've been doing over the past few years. And today, Trinidad and Tobago has gotten an upgrade in its travel advisory. I didn't see it reported, but I can guarantee you if it was a downgrade, it would have been a lot of news. Well done, Trinidad and Tobago. We've also been using the increased use of technology in the fight of crime. And I want to remind the population of Trinidad and Tobago, when we came in as an administration in 2015, I was told by the special forces and by our intelligence services that in the period 2010 to 2015, some very strange things happened. The facial recognition system was dismantled by the former administration. The use of the helicopter for special forces was converted to a maxi taxi with a wet bar and a flat screen TV to fly from north to south. That is what the special forces said. It is true. I have seen it for myself. What they also did, Madam President, is they dismantled the servers for use by our intelligence services. Those are some of the things that were done, and those are the effects of that type of behavior is what we are facing today as a country. I am happy to say, Madam President, that we have fixed those issues. We are in the process of upgrading the technology. I won't get into the specifics of the upgrades, but the people of Trinidad and Tobago can know that the current administration is working very closely in terms of providing the resources and the best technology available that we can afford and value for money with no kickbacks in any contract for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We also revamped the SSA, because I'll remind the population, prior to us, they disbanded SORT. SORT was one of the institutions that was working well in the fight of crime, against crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Why did we revamp the SSA? Because the legislation for the Strategic Services Agency, that legislation provides for officers from the police service, from the defense force to be seconded into that body. So it's all legal, unlike what happened before. And they are now working well together. And there are a number of specialist units that are working with those various agencies, and we're seeing the effects because the detection rates have gone up, as I'll show in a short while. Madam Speaker, Madam President, mention of the youth, because Senator Obika is right. One of the ways you tackle crime is by giving the youth, the disadvantaged youth, and also those who may have difficulties, an alternative to a life of crime. But it's not about talk. It's not about cheap talk and politics. What we have done as a cabinet is we did tracer studies of the MILAT program and the CCC program to make sure that taxpayers would get value for money. And when we saw the results of that, and we saw the positive effects, and we tested it scientifically, not Vikivai, not just grant a contract and give people jobs. That's not how we operate. We decided to increase. None other than the Prime Minister directed us as a cabinet. He wanted us to increase the intakes of the CCTV, MILAT. We're also using the National Crime Prevention Plan to engage the youth at primary school and secondary school level. And I'd like to thank my colleague, the Parliamentary Secretary at the Ministry of National Security, Ms. Glenda Jennings-Smith, for driving that process and using her experience to engage the youth of Trinidad and Tobago as we tackle crime there. I'm also happy to announce that we're currently looking at refurbishing and re-evaluating the cadets in Trinidad and Tobago, borders, because there are a lot of illegal firearms and ammunition now available in Trinidad and Tobago. And we all know the reason why. Not only porous borders on our seafront, but also difficulties at PRCO. And that's why I made the point with the dismantling of some of the equipment at PRCO between 2010 and 2015, and some of the technology, it allowed porous entry, both in our legal airports and also at our ports. So let's start with the seaports. This government has implemented and is using the scanners at the ports of Trinidad and Tobago, Point Lisas and Port of Spain. Despite all of the noise and all of the lies told, they are in use. Just today, I was telling Minister Sinan, and I'd like to personally commend him for working along with me as the Minister of National Security. TSA, Transportation Security Agency in the United States, in charge of all of their airports, was grading Trinidad and Tobago. And we were at risk for a period of time. Working along with Minister Sinanan, the two of us driving it from the top. I'm happy to say that this morning I started off my day with a meeting with the TSA, and they have given us a clean bill of health, and we have done all that needs to be done. And as I told the TSA, we are not stopping there. We will continue to improve the security systems at ParlView Airport, and we have been doing so. Borders, or sea borders. We came in as an administration in 2015, and saw that the hostile fast patrol vessels were falling one by one. When we inquired why, the reason was that the maintenance contracts were not renewed for the hostile fast ferries. And you know why? Because the other administration, the former administration, decided they wanted to procure Daemon vessels. Rather than keep and maintain what we had, they entered into a procurement of new vessels. And we will hear in the coming months about the investigation surrounding the procurement of those vessels, I'm sure. So in any way, what we face is 6 hostile fast patrol vessels grounded. Shame and disgrace. But that is what we face. So what did we do? The Prime Minister went to hostile. We had demonstrations done. We then sent the Chief of Defense Staff and the Chief Engineer from the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, and they came back and recommended in writing that we go ahead and procure 2 Cape-class vessels. I wish we had it before, but they will arrive here next year. That is one of the aspects we've done to safeguard our borders. Also, the radar system. We have taken a decision to upgrade the radar system, and the radar system is operational. I went and saw it myself in action last week, Friday, and it is working. And I can tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago here today, despite all of the noise, all of the untruths, all of the attempts to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago with persons coming in on our southern coast, the day after, the 14th of June, when the registration process came in, the radar system, and I met with the analysts and the technicians, saw it for myself. There was one vessel that tried to come in from Venezuela on those borders, where we were hearing from the chairman of the Superior Regional Corporation, thousands coming in by the week, hearing another councillor of no worth whatsoever screaming. There's boatloads of them coming in. I tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago, through you, Madam President, completely untrue, and the technology is there, and the technology has proved it. But what we also use the technology for the first time, they told me, and it was in a conversation I'd had with the CDS some time back, I said, use your radar system. Use the technology and analyze the data. Go back and look at the points. Because even in the sea, Madam President, there are pathways that persons will use time and time again. I said, analyze the coastline, see where the points of entry with the most points of entry are. And that is what we did. We found, through data and statistics, where were the points of entry, and that is where we drove our limited resources via intelligence. And I'd like to thank the Coast Guard, the Defense Force, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and the Intelligence Service for effectively being able to prevent a lot more entry on our borders. And we have been picking up a lot of the illegal arms and ammunition. Just this morning, there was a big find of marijuana on a boat out there. We continue to do the work, and they are effectively fighting the criminal element. As I say that, they've also been able to reduce the intake of illegal drugs into Trinidad and Tobago, and that is what some of the murders have been about, because people can't pay for the consignments of their drugs, and then the gangs deal with each other in that way, unfortunately. We've been using multi-agency task force on our borders, the special operators on our borders, and it's been very effective. Madam Speaker, Madam President, criminal justice system, because that's another element in the fight against crime. As we constantly talk around the table with the heads, we can do all that we can. We can find the criminals, we can investigate them, we can charge them, and then it goes to the court system. The government has not thrown up its arms. The government accepts and recognizes separation of power. And what have we done? I heard the mockery about the legislation. That is their way. They must try to mock and make fun of it. But the population knows better. In assisting the judiciary to have a more effective criminal justice system, we've improved the court system. We've allowed for specialized criminal courts and for the recruitment of more high court judges. Plea bargaining, we've seen the use of the plea bargaining legislation recently. Very effective. A former attorney general and a former senator charged as a result of plea bargaining arrangements. Termination of preliminary inquiries, well on the way. Explain your wealth legislation. I look forward to the use of this type of legislation. Gangs, Madam President. Gangs are one of the largest scourges on Trinidad and Tobago and in the fight against crime. Gangs and illegal firearms. And I'd like to take this opportunity through you, Madam President, to thank the members of the independent bench for the great work they did for Trinidad and Tobago not too long ago, and the work they did in particular with the bail amendment bill. And we currently have it before us, so thank you. Thank you, Senator Vera Richards, all of the senators who are here, for taking that step forward. Because I listened, and some of the bold remarks made. We have to be part of the solution in the fight against crime. And how we do that as legislators is by our contribution to proper legislation to assist in the fight against crime. We have the firearms amendment bill. I'll come and participate in that in not too distant future. That is also an important element. These pieces of legislation are asked for by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I can tell you all, the fight that we're carrying out there on the streets is a frightening one. And we need this legislation to tackle the criminal element because they have no regard for life and no regard for law and order. So if they know, Madam President, that having an illegal firearm in their possession once, twice, is going to mean a lot more for them, they're going to be stuck in a prison and can't come out, I guarantee you, senators and people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is going to have a positive effect in the fight against crime. I heard the mockery of the anti-gang legislation and the suggestion that came from my lips that only 5 people had been charged. If those on the other side took the time to read the anti-gang legislation, they would understand that the effect of the anti-gang legislation is not only about criminal charges. The anti-gang legislation allows the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in their investigations and in their pursuit against criminals who are living a life of crime through gangs, special powers. Powers to enter premises, powers to arrest persons who are harboring criminals, powers to pull persons aside for questioning, etc. And it is being used, no matter how much they sing. And it was not us who got the population to come down on the opposition. The population is fed up of the crime, and the government is providing solutions not only through legislation, but that was the one that was at the forefront. And they had to put their tails between their legs, approach us, and come and pass. And I'm glad they passed it. And I wouldn't harbor on that point. The point I want to make to the population of Trinidad and Tobago, the anti-gang legislation is critical, and it is being utilized by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. To have an effective investigation that turns intelligence and information into evidence that can then be used to charge and prosecute persons takes time. The legislation was not retroactive, so it was the start point for us to begin building the intelligence and information, converting it to evidence, and it will lead to charges. I told the people of Trinidad and Tobago that year. There will be big fish taken down in the next set of operations before the end of the year. There are charges that will be laid. The anti-gang legislation is a critical tool in the fight against crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is this government that you talk about implementation. That anti-gang legislation was first brought in 2012, 2011, and failed. They talk about implementation. It failed, and it had the support of the PNM opposition at the time. And it has cost this country and the taxpayers of this country hundreds of millions of dollars in damages through the bundling of the utilization and implementation of that anti-gang legislation by the former administration. That is not happening now. What the population is getting now is the proper use of legislation, and it is being effectively used in the fight against crime. Electric monitoring bracelets about to be implemented. Again, passed under the former administration. It is finally going to be implemented this year, and I look forward to the use of it. DNA, as I said before, the DNA operations are up. We're building a new DNA lab along with our Forensic Science Center. We are having improved CCTV. I don't know what the comment in passing about a breakdown in the CCTV system, completely untrue. What we've actually been doing over the past few months is implementing new state-of-the-art cameras into our CCTV system, and I guarantee and I tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is working well, including the provision of facial recognition. So we are utilizing technology with the limited budgets we have. Our prison services, you see, Madam President, our prison services also play a very important part in the landscape and the structure in the fight against crime, a very important role. As Minister of National Security, I've visited all of the remand yards. I hear persons talking about the remand yards. I have experienced all. And I have said here before, and I'll say it again, when I visited the Tobago prison, I walked out of there an angry citizen of Trinidad and Tobago because all of the administrations gone in the past, there's a fence that was built up at the maximum security prison, not around the prison, not blocking off anything, blocking off empty land, built in 2014 for $80 million. $80 million for a fence that protects nothing. And we sit here and listen to the audacity of those suggesting about fight against crime, participants in crime maybe. So, Madam President, what we're going to do is, as a cabinet, we're going to take a decision to build a new correctional facility in Tobago. We've also, with the prison systems, Madam President, upgraded the alarm system. We've also, Madam President, taken a decision to upgrade and improve the remand yard facilities at Golden Grove. Again, when money was flowing, that $80 million could have been taken to improve the system at the remand yard. We are doing it for $53 million, and it has begun. It has begun. So the prisoners at remand will now get more humane conditions. We have upgraded the CCTV camera system. Stab vests and firearms provided for the fire officers, for the prisons officers. We've improved the security at the prisons. We are going to build a special court, Madam President, a special court to deal with those high-risk prisoners who inconvenience Trinidad and Tobago week and time again. The video conferencing court, we're handing it over to the judiciary, who will finish it. So, Madam President, those are just a few of the decisions taken and implemented and will be completed by this administration in dealing with the prison system. There's a lot more, but I don't want to speak about it. So there is implementation taking place. Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, one of the best uses of technology. I heard it being suggested that there are still vehicles not working. Not true. The ERP system now, implemented by the current Commissioner of Police, is a great use of technology. You all would see it, the vehicles driving around with the cameras on the roofs. What we do is we deploy them all over Trinidad and Tobago. So when you call a station or you call 999, it's no longer about a vehicle leaving the nearest police station, Madam President, but one of those ERP vehicles that we're constantly monitoring through GPS. We can direct one or two to who are the closest to the scene of the crime. And it has been working. On an hourly basis, reports are coming through. The reports are being shared. That use of technology, something as simple as all of the executives of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service now being on a WhatsApp group and sharing information, has proved invaluable. So someone in Maruga who says, look, I've picked up somebody from 4 Roads, the officer, the divisional head for the Western Division can then say, well, hold on, this is what we know about him. People of Trinidad and Tobago, that is happening. It was not happening before. The technology is being used. There's better communication amongst the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The use of video and audio-visual recording. Again, when we came in as an administration, the British told us that despite all they had asked prior for the use of visual and audio recording systems in the interrogation of prisoners, there was a reluctance to get it done. We have gotten it done. It is being used. I heard you talk about community policing, Madam President. One of the main planks and pillars we have introduced, have implemented, and it is being utilized, is an increase in the municipal police. 2 batches are already out on the fields spread throughout Trinidad and Tobago. The third batch is currently in training and will soon pass out. Ballistics. Absolutely, we need the ballistics testing. And what have we been doing with respect to ballistics? We've built out the capacity. I want to tell the country another story that we met when we came in, Madam President. Madam President, as soon as we came in, none other than, once again, the United States government told us that between 2010 and 2015, they spent millions of dollars in training specific police officers in the testing of ballistics and formed a special unit called CIRU. And they asked us to reestablish it. So again, the Prime Minister and myself asked, well, what do you mean by reestablish it? You know what the former administration did after all of those officers were trained? They dismantled the ballistics unit called CIRU, and they sent persons to direct traffic all over the country and to various traffic outposts all over the country and police stations. Does that indicate to the population that they were serious about the fight against crime? So immediately, instructions were given and carried out, and that unit is back in operation. But these are not things that we talk about, the effectiveness of their work. Also, what we've been doing is we are now playing, once again, a leading role in the CARICOM with something called CONSLI. They would know what CONSLI is because they didn't participate. But immediately at CARICOM, we are now playing a leading role. Not only is the Prime Minister...
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Not only is the Prime Minister of the region in charge of security, but we are now once again playing a leading role with CONSLI, which is the meetings of all of the ministers of national security throughout the Caribbean. Not too long ago, about a month ago, I led a team of CARICOM ministers of national security, participated with them in Washington as we went to lobby for more assistance in the field of ballistics and other areas, and we will get it. TOCU, a very special unit. I won't talk too much about what they do. But again, in 2014 to 2015, those on the other side wanted to disband TOCU. It's an intelligence unit that goes after transnational organized crime. And you know how come they weren't able to, no matter how hard they tried? Because the United Kingdom government told Trinidad and Tobago, if you disband TOCU, we will impose visas onto the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the only reason why they kept it. It wasn't properly utilized, wasn't properly resourced. I laugh when I hear them talk about resources. Effectively working under this administration once again today. Madam President, just to deal very, very quickly, I heard the talk about corruption. White-collar crime and corruption is an important element that must be tackled in the fight against crime. And I'd like to say, as an administration, that is exactly what we did. EMBD, Eden Gardens, there also been charges laid, that's not the government, but charges laid under this administration on a former Attorney General and a former Senator for acts of corruption. Stoops all they want, but there are facts to be spoken, and their facts are real. So those are the things that are taking...
Minister, I know that you have said it, but I would ask you not to discuss any other parts of those court actions.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the point is a simple one, that for the first time you have an administration that was prepared to tackle white-collar crime. A lot of talk about Venezuela, but I understand I'll be back here later on this evening dealing with elements of Venezuela. But I just want to touch on the suggestion that the Commissioner of Police had a number of criminal elements from Venezuela in hiding, etc. There is going to be implemented a special unit to deal with not only the Venezuelans, but all foreign criminal elements. I have already begun. The persons that were referred to in terms of a former gang member who was, and this is the important point, not roaming out there, but we found and held that Venezuelan gang leader. I have signed his deportation orders, and he will be deported. That is what this administration does. We found them, charged them, and they are to be deported. The registration process has also assisted us in that because it allowed us to build out a lot of intelligence. Said that the murder rate increased even though we passed the anti-gang legislation. Not true. The anti-gang legislation is being used, Madam President. I also heard suggestion that this administration tackled MAT and individuals in MAT, the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago. As the senator knows, but he's prepared to attempt to mislead the population, no one in the government of Trinidad and Tobago tackled Matt or any individual from Matt. That is just a complete fabrication. It is an untruth, and it is a misrepresentation of fact. Also talked about stopping protests outside of Parliament. Again, Madam President, completely untrue, and I put it on the Hansard here today and to the record and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This government has given no such direction. What you have is a commissioner of police who is intent on upholding the law, and he has not said people cannot protest. He has said, seek my permission and you shall be allowed to protest. I have heard the stories from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service of busloads of persons being brought in to protest outside the Parliament. And when they're being asked, why are you here and for what reason, they do not even know. So the Commissioner of Police is upholding the law, and that is not on any directive of the Minister of National Security. Thank you very much. And I'm hearing, I want the population to know that Senator Obika has said it is not the place of the Commissioner of Police to uphold the law.
I'm going to correct
Madam
the report.
Speaker.
It is the rights of the citizens.
Senator Obika, Senator Obika, Senator Obika, Senator Amin, please. Senator Obika, that is not the way to invoke a standing order, and all of this can be avoided if members will remain silent when another person is speaking. Okay? Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So, Madam President.
Rise and vote standing order 46.6 and what the minister said.
Minister, continue, but you have to wind up because...
Thank you very much. So, Madam Speaker, I end by saying to the population of Trinidad and Tobago that this administration is resourcing and helping those whose duty it is to fight and tackle crime. We take it very seriously, and we know that everyone's life has the potential to be affected by crime. And we will continue to do all that we're doing and more for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Thompson-Aye. Senator Dillon-Remy.
I thank you, Madam President, for joining this debate. My purpose here today is to establish that crime is every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago's business. As I heard the, let's say, bantering between the two sides of between the opposition and the government benches just now, I think, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as many of our population is concerned, the blame game has to stop. When somebody's in opposition, they are concerned about crime, and when they get into government, they try to do something about it. They may or may not succeed, and this keeps going again and again and again. Crime is out of control in Trinidad and Tobago, and I appreciated what the minister just said in terms of the serious crime, in terms of numbers going down. But anybody in Trinidad and Tobago will tell you today that what is happening in terms of crime is unacceptable. So even though the numbers may be going down in terms of serious crime, we are all concerned. But as I'm saying, it is everybody's business. The opposition's business, as well as it is the government's business. And it is time we take responsibility for what is going on in the nation. The problems that we have in Trinidad and Tobago at every level have been created by us. At the level of the politics, at the level of the community, at the level of the individuals. These problems did not happen overnight. The problems with crime kept climbing over the years, and so far, our efforts have not been successful. Yes, we are making progress, but we have to make even more progress. And I'm saying it has to be done at every level. The Minister of National Security was very clear just now that the responsibility of crime prevention, detection, etc., is the responsibility of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. However, what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago right now it's beyond the police service, as far as I'm concerned. It has to go to the level of the businessmen. It has to go to the level of the community in terms of what is happening, in terms of where our criminals are being nurtured. It has to go to the level of the schools. It has to go to every level in order for some things to be done significantly about it. So yes, the parliamentarians may be doing what they need to be doing in terms of passing legislation. And yes, the police service, as far as the Minister of National Security and all the efforts that are going on recently, I am certainly happy about it, but it is more than them. The horror stories are too numerous to mention. They have been spoken, and there have been several debates here in the Parliament. We know the statistics. And I think what is happening to many of us right now is as you have another murder, it is now next. The toll is going up. We are listening to it on television. We are seeing it on the papers. And right now, many of us, our hearts are, you know, we don't know what else to do, but next. And these are lives. I think if we calculate the number of people, I'm not too sure who has done it, who is doing the research, the number of people, young people, over the last, say, 10 years, who have lost their lives in this country as a result of crime. It will be certainly, I don't know, world war. It's worse than wars. We have wars that are going on in our nation, and it needs to stop. And I'm saying it cannot be stopped at the level of the politicians alone. It cannot be stopped at the level of the police service alone. It has to be stopped when every citizen of this country says, I take responsibility for what is going on here, and I have to do something about it. And that's how I feel about it. Madam President, our criminals are being nurtured. They don't fall from the sky. They are born in a community. When the mother is pregnant, she goes to a healthcare facility. So she's seen and examined by our nurses or doctors. She then goes to the hospital and delivers, because most of our babies are delivered in hospital. The young children within the first 5 years are seen in our healthcare institution. So they're seen. These people don't come out from the sky. They don't drop from Mars. They're in our communities. They go into our schools. The schools are in communities. They are seen by our teachers. In other words, every step of the way, we know where these people are. They are not invasions that have come from Mars. We nurture them in our communities. My understanding is that since we are nurturing them and we know exactly where they are, we can stop what is happening. Many of them are also in our places of worship. Madam President, crime is profiting. The day people no longer profit from crime, it's going to stop. And even what was happening here today, it's profiting the politicians to quarrel and complain that the others are not doing something about it. It's profiting some to say that the others did not do what they were supposed to do when it is profiting people. It has to stop. When crime no longer profits people, it is going to stop. And right now, as far as the nation is concerned, it is not good enough for the politicians to be blaming one another. We all have to take responsibility for what is going on. Our criminals vote. Our criminals vote. And the other day, there was a video going around where in some communities, somebody was saying to politicians who was passing through, we vote for you, and we won't vote for you again if or criminals vote. And therefore, if we know who they are and where they are, and they vote for us or not vote for us, we can do something about it. Madam President, we have a knight in shining armor kind of Spider-Man superhero has to come to solve crime. And that's exactly what was happening And even the Minister of National Security spoke about it again. Everybody was talking about crime. What is happening with crime? We need a Minister of National Security. I mean, we need a Commissioner of Police. As though this Commissioner of Police was going to come, and immediately as he came, everything was going to happen. He has come, he's struggling. Why? Because there are many systems that need to be put into place. And he's doing his best with all the facilities and all the new things that they are doing, and those are fine. But it's beyond the minister, it's beyond the Commissioner of Police alone. He has to have support, and the support has to come from all of us. I do commend, and I'm happy to hear what the minister just reported in terms of the interagency task force and all these things that are being done. All those are commendable, but they must continue. They cannot be an overnight thing that's happening. Madam President, I want to share a story about a visit that I had to a police station probably about 3 years ago, reporting an accident. A young man bounced my car one day, and I went to make a report to the police station, and this young constable said to me, "You know that in that area there are drugs or drug people operating?" He asked if I knew the name of the person who bounced the car. Yes, I gave him the name. And then he said, did the person say he was going to fix the car? He said yes. I said yes. And then he proceeded to tell me that he was going to call the person and ask the person to make sure that he fixed my car. And I'm saying, this is a young police officer telling me that there's crime going on and this is a drug, whatever, and the person was probably involved in drugs. Why should he be telling me this and not doing anything about it? Why should he be telling me this and then calling the person and telling the person, you better fix the lady's car? As far as I was concerned, it was very strange. But unfortunately, Madam President, about a year later, that young man was gunned down. He's now dead. We have probably, if something was done about it, at that point in time, he may not have been. Many of the people in the police service know exactly what is going on, and there seems to be a reluctance in terms of doing things about it. And again, I commend what the minister just said in terms of the actions of the Commissioner of Police and what is happening now. And I do, for all our sakes, wish them well in terms of the activities that are happening. Madam President, my understanding is that the solution to crime, as I said, is everybody's business. Yes, the police service may have a central role to play, but the role in terms of the solutions have to come at every level, where at the community level where the criminals are being nurtured, as I said, we have to get into those communities. We have to get to the parents. We have to have parenting programs in those communities where at least the parents are assisted in terms of making decisions and stuff like that for their children and their families. We have to have intervention at the community level. We have to have intervention at the level of the business people. We have to have intervention at the level of the schools. What is happening in the schools? Many of the children are coming out and they don't know how to read and write. And as far as they're concerned, they can't do well in school, so they might as well go into crime. It pays them more anyway than going to look for a job. So we have to get our interventions also at that level, Madam President. We have to get interventions at the level of our places of worship. They are very important in our communities. We have different faiths, and Trinidad and Tobago is a country that's very involved with different types, different communities of worship, and they're important to our communities. They have to also be involved in the crime prevention. Our communities have to say there's zero tolerance to crime and mean it. I remember a couple years ago, I was told about a situation where the people in Charlottesville said that we don't have crime down here because people know that if they come here and they commit crime, we are going to deal with them. they had a zero tolerance for crime. I'm saying that our communities have to say that we are not accepting what is happening in our communities in order for it to stop. The communities have to stop harboring criminals. The communities have to stop knowing where the criminals are and not sharing the information with the police services. Yes, I know there are problems because they're concerned about safety, etc. But I'm saying when, at the level of the Trinidad and Tobago, when that happens, we are going to see something that is very different. Madam President, I heard about a program that happened in the prison services in Colombia. I was trying to find the details of it, but I couldn't in preparation for today, but it's something that we can look up. In the prisons in Colombia, where there were notorious gangs and criminals, etc., a values program was introduced where these criminals were taught about certain values. It caused a turnaround in what was happening within the prison. Something like that, I'm sure, would benefit. We have people going into prisons, we have Vision and Mission, we have different organizations going into prison. I'm suggesting that a program that is sustained and that teaches the persons in prison values probably would be something that will be of benefit and can work in our prison systems here. Values-based education, the young people in school, they are being nurtured right now. In some areas, like the schools in Tobago, there's a character-based program that is teaching the children about character, values of respect, responsibility, etc., being good citizens. I'm suggesting that those kinds of programs can be very helpful in terms of young people and prevention of crime. Businesswomen, businessmen need to also be involved in providing solutions. My understanding, Madam President, is that the situation that we have within Trinidad and Tobago was created by us, and we have the solutions within ourselves and within our communities. And at every level, so I commend the Minister of National Security, the Commissioner of Police, and all that is happening at that level. And at the level of the Parliament, there have been a lot of work going on here in terms of the legislative agenda. The Minister also mentioned that what has happened in terms of the judiciary. At every level, we have to be involved, but it has to be a coordinated effort. It can't be that one person is doing one thing here and then somebody doing something else. So I'm suggesting that we have a coordinated effort, as crime is our #1 problem in Trinidad and Tobago, and in that way we are going to see a positive effect. Madam President, crime is out of control. The solution is with us. And we must put our collective heads to get control of it. At every level, we need leaders to find the solutions, and I know that we can do it. I thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam. Firstly, I'd like to just thank Senator Obika for bringing this very important motion on crime and security and on public safety to the Senate. I know in recent times we have had elements of a crime debate by way of the legislation that is before the Senate. And today we get to deal with it in a more holistic fashion. And Madam President, as I prepared for the debate, and I'm prepared specifically for the response of the Minister of National Security, I am not a person that is easily shocked or a person that really gets shocked by another person's behavior, because I've come to expect very little from some of the leaders in our society today. But Madam President, what I saw today by way of intellectual gymnastics and dishonesty was beyond me. The Minister of National Security looked at the motion. The first part of the motion says the responsibility of the government to ensure public safety and security through the maintenance of law and order. And the second is that the government has failed to address the extraordinary increase in the level of crime. Now, to me, Madam President, the first two parts, the minister or any sensible person had to at least agree with. Because if you had come here to say, perhaps these are interventions and it may need a little more time, that's one thing. But to come here and say, the minister said, I'm going to debunk the second part of the motion and then give us a serious crime statistic and tell us that serious crime is down, and then later on in his presentation, outright say that it is untrue to say since the passage of the anti-gang legislation that murders have gone up. I mean, Madam President, that was dishonest beyond measure. The facts are before us. How could you stand up here and say that like we don't live in this country, Madam President, and then go on to say crime is about perception and that there are elements in this society and pointing at the opposition and telling us that crime is about perception and there are those of us who want to instill fear in the population. The same Minister of National Security that was here in a last debate to tell us crime is out of control. If you all don't do something and help us, what are we going to do? The same minister that sits next to the Attorney General that has come here time and time again to seek to weaponize our fear for the passage of legislation to say, you are afraid of crime. Things are out of control. Help us pass this legislation. This will help the problem. To come here and today suggest that serious crime is down and that the opposition is instilling fear by pretending there's a problem, Madam President, intellectual gymnastics and dishonesty by the Minister of National Security. I could not believe what I was hearing here today. Madam President, when Senator Dillon-Remy stood up, and really it is not my intention to go through an entire response to the Minister of National Security because I agree with Senator Dillon-Remy that the population is so completely fed up of this kind of blame game and this constant who did what and who did. But Madam President, the response by the Minister of National Security has me incredibly incensed that you came here today to discuss the responsibility of the government to ensure public safety. And at a point in time, the Minister of National Security makes the statement that the body in charge of policing is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, which is true. And then the minister dropped a bunch of we's in there, and we are doing this, and we've charged people, and we've done this. And and I'm seeing where the problem is, Madam President. The Minister of National Security hasn't found his space in this thing yet. He does not understand at all what his role is. He has no concept of what his role is. And I'll give you, and I'll explain why I say that. So, the minister has said that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is responsible, but then he said that we are bringing charges and these people are going to be charged, etc., etc. And yes, exactly. So at some point in time, the Minister of National Security felt that he joined the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as a PC. So he is PC Minister Stuart Young in this house because he could come here and tell us who is going to be charged and when. And the reason the minister cannot find his space in this thing and to present cogent arguments at a targeted approach to a solution to our crime problem is because they are not focused on a solution. They are a government obsessed with the opposition, obsessed with the United National Congress, and that obsession has put blinders over them. Madam President, anything you look at, including the response to this debate here today, all the minister could find to talk about is the United National Congress and opposition and who they're coming for and who you're looking for and who will be next. And this is the problem. That is our Minister of National Security and Communications. I wouldn't go down the laundry list, but I'll keep it at the two main. And as a matter of fact, I took another note. When the minister was going through the, again, blatant dishonesty with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with our international partners, including the United States. Minister of National Security, who, according to the public record, became Minister of National Security last year. Yes, 2018? The minister did not even realize that. Because as the minister came here today, he said, the US spoke to the Prime Minister and myself and told us we couldn't trust X, Y, and Z in the last administration. This is early on, 2015, 2016. The US spoke to the Prime Minister and myself. Why were they speaking to the minister, to Minister Young at that time? He was not Minister of National Security. He is confusing himself. I'm telling you, Madam President, the approach by the minister to just try to come in here and drop blows and say X, Y, and Z, you could tell he was really going to confuse himself today. You trip up himself bad. You see him telling us today that you are repairing a relationship with the United States of America that the People's Partnership somehow did not have. Bringing no evidence to back that claim up, because you say it, so it's so. But in the papers, in the newspapers in the last week, the United States puts out a report, the TIPS report on human trafficking. The Prime Minister, no other but the Prime Minister, pretty sure did not read the report, hop up on a tirade, right? Talking about the same United States. How well you could say that? Right? The Minister of National Security, sitting in a cabinet, where the Prime Minister is buffing up international partners left, right, and center, coming here to tell us about repairing relationships and telling you intellectual gymnastics afoot today, Madam President. That happened in the last week. And then telling us that you came here, that you've gone to the United States and you've gone to Washington, and you've gotten to seek help for ballistics, etc. So on one hand, you're going to seek help, and on the other hand, you're saying, don't tell me nothing. But on the other hand, you're saying the British, the UK, has changed our advisory. So either you like when the international partner says something, or you don't like it, but you don't get to just, in the same sentence, do that kind of gymnastics and play one side and the other. You like it or you don't like it. And the minister really needs to make up his mind. And you know, Madam President, I sat here today and I listened to a Minister of National Security call out things as achievements, including to say that there is now, under this administration, a coordinated approach with all the agencies of national security. Madam President, the establishment of the National Operations Center, which they did not like, right, was under the People's Partnership Administration. The foundation of the National Operations Center was a coordinated, centralized approach of all agencies responsible for security. So you came here and act like that's something that happened last year. The minister said, you know, and the most honest thing the minister said today was that they let us judge them by the results. We are fully prepared to judge you by the results of your crime interventions, because they are failing. But you have also, Madam President, what they fail to understand is that failure in national security impacts people's lives. Madam President. People in this country are fearful for their lives. And that is not just because of a perception. It's because more and more of us have become victims of crime or know somebody who's become a victim of crime, Madam President. And then you come here and you list off things, one after the next, without talking about its effectiveness and its impact. And telling us that we have an vested interest in whether or not, and if they fail in the crime situation. Madam President, this is an administration that is failing in healthcare, failing in education, failing on the economy. From a political perspective, we don't need them to fail on crime, you know. We hope they could get some success in this area because it directly impacts the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But Madam President, they are so comfortable in their mediocrity and so comfortable in their failure that they don't even bother. They don't even bother to say, listen, these are our targets. This is what we hope to achieve. These are the interventions that will achieve it. Because, Madam President, like I said, they are not thinking about solutions. They are really just obsessed with the opposition. Madam President, I've heard the Attorney General say that what we have in Trinidad and Tobago now is that the crime situation, and this is why I talk about intellectual gymnastics, members of the other side have admitted that crime, particularly murders and serious crime, traditionally tends to increase at the times when the People's National Movement is in power. They've admitted that. And then would suggest that the reason crime would increase under them is not their fault. It's because perhaps there was another government before and they did X, Y, and Z. But then come here and talk about the interventions that we put into place, that they fail to effectively utilize, but rather attempt to recreate and use it in a different way, or much like what they're doing with the Couva Children's Hospital, right? You had the hospital, you're going to use it, but you're going to just you leave it closed for 4 years, and you come now and you try to rename it and pretend it's a whole new thing. That's what they're doing. That is what they try to do with the National Operations Center and this idea that they have some brand new establishment of interagency work. Madam President, you know, the Minister of National Security came here to tell us about the Commissioner of Police. And I know that the selection of a Commissioner of Police is their one saving grace and accomplishment under the area of national security. And you know, when you set an incredibly low bar for yourself, you'll always get the pass mark or the highest grade, right? So the one thing you wanted to achieve, yes, but you know, as my colleague reminded me, yes, they are in a habit of grading themselves. You didn't like the F grade from TIPS report, you want to grade yourself. You didn't like the grade from the financial bodies, you come back to grade yourself. So if you don't like the grade, you just mark your paper accordingly. But, Madam President, the selection of a Commissioner of Police, and then to be listed as the main achievement of this government, has to be the lowest bar any administration has set. Because the minister admitted that up until 2018, Dwayne Gibbs was the Commissioner of Police, so it has happened. Therefore, what are you really telling us? You did one thing in 4 years, and you pat yourself on the back for the next, year and a half, with no measurable impact on the crime situation as yet, Mr. Vice President. when the Minister of National Security was speaking, and he raised that point on the collaboration with international partners, I had to go through some of the documents that we have collected as a party, the United National Congress, and what we would have achieved in our tenure as government from 2010 to 2015. And because I remember clearly the significant amount of work that was done. Because you did see, and I want to put the numbers on the record, Mr. Vice President, because I think there seems to be for some strange reason, the government thinks that they can fiddle with the numbers, or at least pretend they don't exist as they do. But between 2010 and 2015, the murder numbers decreased. We saw a drop in the measure that we use most, murders. In 2018, at 516 murders, we were at the highest we had been since 2008, Mr. Vice President. Those are the facts as they lay before us. The reason, so then when you come here now and you tell us that every time you are in government, crime spirals out of control, but you can't take responsibility for it, what are you really telling the nation? If you can admit that the responsibility, and you know, the responsibility of the state, the primary responsibility of the state is to protect the citizens of the country. The Prime Minister acknowledged that he is on record as saying, if you cannot deal with the problem as a government, you are part of the problem as the government. So then I went through the document, and there was we had highlighted collaboration with international agencies. And this gave a concrete example of where the collaboration under the People's Partnership tenure with international agencies yielded results. And I'll put it on the record now. Trinidad and Tobago law enforcement agencies have successfully collaborated with regional and international security counterparts in several drug interdiction operations. In October 2013, 800 kilos of cocaine was seized through local agencies, inclusive of the transnational organized crime unit working with Spanish police. Based on critical tip-offs data acquired through our intelligence agencies, local law enforcement worked with the United Kingdom National Crime Agency and French Customs and Caribbean Operation, upon which 310 kilos of cocaine were further seized. The ministry, that is the Ministry of National Security under the People's Partnership Administration in 2013, had been forging stronger communication links with countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Colombia, China, France, Spain, and Italy. You see, so when the Minister of National Security and Communication, a person that society would hope would be a credible source of information, comes here and says the United States tell him and the Prime Minister that they couldn't talk to anybody in the previous administration. When the data, anybody that is just willing to check easily can prove that to be false, Mr. Vice President, we are in trouble as a nation because we cannot believe anything he has to say. He came here in Parliament and said that on more than one occasion. You don't believe. The nation does not believe. Madam, Mr. Vice President, I mean, the Minister of Trade is telling me now that we will see. I'm not quite sure what we are hoping to see. I'm really not quite sure what the minister is hoping that we see. Because you know, when the Minister of National Security again said today, serious crimes are down, and that again, the opposition is trying to instill fear. I don't know that the minister checked that statement against the Prime Minister, because I have a statement from the Prime Minister from the end of last year, where the minister said, not in this country, nobody, not man, not woman, not child, could present an argument to us in Trinidad and Tobago, a convincing argument that we do not have a serious crime problem. That is the Prime Minister. Right? So I think in future, the Minister of National Security should allow the Prime Minister to at very least vet his speeches before he comes here so they don't contradict each other in that manner, because it's quite embarrassing. And yeah, at the very least, listen to when the Prime Minister is speaking, because then you would understand that there is a problem and that you as the minister are supposed to be part of the solution instead of coming here and pretending there is no problem. Yes, I remember that. The Minister of National Security, Mr. Vice President, went on to talk about the municipal police as an example of community policing. In a number of budget contributions, we had raised that they kept putting this as an achievement or as a possible intervention in crime, not allocating the money, not implementing it. But if the government had been serious about community policing, all they had to do, Mr. Vice President, was keep the system that was in place prior to 2015. Because we had set up a system of community policing. And it is because we went with an overarching philosophy that in order to see a sustained and sustainable decrease in the crime situation in our country, you have to take community-based approaches. This takes community-based crime prevention strategies, crime detection strategies. It also takes into consideration things like education, healthcare, your standard of living, and looking at people as people. And then to come here now and tell me about political football and crime as a political football, when you have been systematically dismantling things that were put in place to build Trinidad and Tobago community by community, and then telling me, and you've done that, and then you're trying to rebrand, or at the very least implement a much less effective way by way of the municipal police, and not think about it, not present to us any kind of details of your implementation, Mr. Vice President, we see very clearly why we're in the problem we have today. We see very clearly why the numbers are increasing and why the numbers have spiked. To look at the motion, and I know what was the bothersome part of the motion for most of the government, that we call that it be resolved, that the Senate calls on the government to table in the shortest possible time a cogent, strategic crime prevention plan to address the unacceptable levels of crime facing the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. And I know what I get a sense I know what the issue here is. So I decided I'll help the government out, and I went to the Oxford Dictionary for them to tell them what a plan is, because I think that's the starting point. They just really don't know what a plan is. And it is a detailed proposal for doing or achieving something. So you identify the problem, you articulate it, and then you provide a detailed proposal for addressing it. The minister could not do that and decided to come to tell us that you have to have a space where some of it, you have to be very strategic, and there must be some level of stealth. But then proceed to tell us about meetings he's not supposed to tell us about, and secret information. So if you, and in saying this idea of stealth, when they were in opposition, they presented a 10-point crime plan that they in no way stuck to. It's gone out the window, gone completely. You can't hear about it again. But all of a sudden now, you really can't tell us what the plan is because it's against the government strategy. Mr. Vice President, I've got to the point on the prison system. And when I listened to what the Minister of National Security had to say, that they were starting up things, and I had to pinch myself because a lot of these programs were in place and then stopped for the claim of a lack of resources. Remember, if you will, Mr. Vice President, when this government came into office, the sky was falling, the treasury was empty, cobwebs, remember? There were, wow. The Minister of Trade is saying fact, but found money to build the pool in Hilton from the empty treasury, right? Found that money. Good. So that when you are telling...
Continue, Senator Haynes.
And so that the narrative of the empty treasury led to a lot of cuts. What they will not tell you is a lot of those cuts also came from prison reform programs. One of the achievements that the government likes to list is the reduction in the size of the cabinet. And in that reduction of the size of the cabinet, you saw the removal of the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice had, under its specific mandate, to look at the prison system and prison reform. And I have in front of me a number of policies that would have been, at the very least, near completion. And so this is the same government that stands here and tells us about merit, or they hired the former advisor on national security and former Minister of National Security. But they won't tell us why they stopped a number of these things that were already in place. If you were so responsible as a government, you would have continued the work that we were doing and built on it instead of just stopping it. You stopped, and then you're coming to restart it 1 year out from an election. Under the Ministry of Justice, you had before it a restorative justice policy. And the minister's mandate was to transform the criminal justice system from retributive model to restorative. And the policy was developed through consultation with all of the relevant stakeholders. And it was anticipated that in the first quarter of 2016, the policy would have been finalized and submitted to cabinet. So, you see, and then when you hear the government speak, they are still speaking about the policy as if it is in the process of being etched out, when really it would have been completed, you could have looked it over, and they could have hit the ground running as a new government. But they chose not to do that, which is why I say time and time again, they are not interested in solutions. So they were trying to carry this blame game as far as possible, and they're going to try to carry it into next year. And so therefore, I really don't see, what I anticipate will happen is a continuation of, well, we finished this policy and we did this policy, because you want to take credit for work that was already done. You know, when you looked at the projects, the Minister of National Security said that he went into the prison system, into all of the prisons, and you know this obsession with the fence. Again, another thing that we really could not believe. But under the People's Partnership, we had the Penal Reform and Transformation Unit under the Ministry of Justice, which facilitated a number of training programs for inmates and staff. And I'm just going to list a couple of them here, Madam President. You looked at, they were trained in unpacking the journey to masculine and feminine excellence in programs for inmates at Remand Prison and Golden Grove Prison and Carrera. At least 300 inmates were trained. Repositioning parents for raising successful youths. You had 50 inmates trained. Rehabilitation of gang members, 41 inmates participated. A man's journey into authentic manhood, 70 inmates participated. You had life skills, pre-release programs. You had in-prison drug treatment and rehabilitation programs. You had persons learning about their space in society. You had persons figuring out how to navigate post-incarceration. These programs were in place. All they needed to do, Madam President, was build on it. All you needed to do was see what was already in place, compare it to what your plans were, assuming you had a plan, and build on it. But you saw no building. You saw no forward movement. You saw none of these things being put in place. What you saw was a cut and paste. You heard the term of whole of government approach bandied about left, right, and center. We're adopting a whole of government approach, X, Y, and Z. And then none of it was articulated in any structured manner on how the whole of government approach was intended to work. Madam President, you have before us a government, and you know, one of my colleagues took great umbrage when the Minister of National Security raised the fact that one of their key new initiatives is this WhatsApp group for the TTPS. And I don't know why my colleague was so surprised. Because this is the Minister of National Security that gets a lot of his information from Facebook. I have been time and time again called in my other remit as public relations officer to respond to statements from the Minister of National Security on something that he saw on Facebook and saw it fit to use the weight of the National Security Ministry to respond to and to comment on, including, and you know, the minister sought to disprove this idea that there has been this tit for tat with the media and whatnot. The love affair with the fake news and misinformation statements comes from the Minister of National Security. Every single time I have to respond to something, it's because the minister is picking something up from Facebook to create a narrative and to create a problem. So, and then I oftentimes respond to that by saying, well, isn't the Minister of National Security busy? A little too busy to be combing through people's Facebook to see who is saying what about him and commenting and sending you messages and then sending the Ministry of National Security press department to respond? And you know, so I wanted to, the reason you would not, I was not in any way shocked that the WhatsApp group was a big achievement is because Facebook is part of the intelligence agency that they're using. You know, the minister spoke about the vehicles and that they're employing technology, and you don't have to worry about a vehicle coming from the station. That you don't have to worry about a vehicle coming from the station.
Senator Haynes, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. And the people will be, that the vehicles would come to you from wherever they are. My information that is coming to me, Madam President, still to this day, is that the government has been not allocating the funds for the regular maintenance and servicing of police vehicles. Police officers are still being told, don't drive too fast. Try to extend the mileage on the vehicles. So it's all well and good you put the camera on top. But if you're not doing regular maintenance on the police vehicles, what are you actually achieving? The minister also came here to tell us to thank the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for the work that they are doing. And I also would like to thank the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for the work that is being done. The work that is being done under extremely strained circumstances, Madam President. You would recall that under the People's Partnership Administration, recognizing that as crime increased, that the people who serve our nation under national security had put themselves at a greater risk. And as Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar said, if you're a police officer who died in the line of duty, that your family would be entitled to $1 million. And we asked about it in 2015 and again in 2016, and it was always something that's being worked on. So I wonder if the Minister of National Security at some point in time will tell us what's the status of this. Because all of the thanks to the police service, all of the thank yous that you're giving out and the recognition of how dangerous the job is, tell us what you're actually doing for the Trinidad and Tobago police service officers. Tell us what's actually being done. Because I think they are beyond the point of just wanting thank yous. You know, a little bit more. A little bit more at this point. And you had, Madam President, officers being told right now, that there's no money for the uniforms. So if your tactical boots, if they are worn out, spend your money and buy it or wear it as is. There's the thanks that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is getting. That's the thanks, right? If you have one pants, and if something happens in that pants, problems, trouble for you. That is the thanks. So you come here, and I don't understand if the minister and the members of the government if they feel like you could come here in Parliament and say anything, and privilege will protect you from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They are watching you. They know when you're not telling the truth. They know what they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So when you come here and you say, don't worry, the opposition trying to tell you be fearful of crime, they know that's not true. When they come here and say you have great respect for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, they know that's not true. Right, Madam President? What they know is that the opposition has brought a motion to say that the government has a responsibility to do something about crime, and that the government has failed to do that thing about crime, and the government, because they are not interested at all in solutions, will continue to fail, because they are going to continue to be obsessed with the opposition. They are going to continue to bring pieces of legislation where they could stand up here and say, that's coming for you, and it's coming for you, and it's coming for the next one, and not be concerned about bringing actual justice to society and peace to Trinidad and Tobago. And I thank you, Madam President.
Before I call on the next speaker, I'd like to just revert to the earlier business. I am now in receipt of the instrument of appointment. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago by Her Excellency ParlView Weeks, ORTT, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, to Mr. Anita Young. Whereas Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, ParlView Weeks, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Anita Young, to be a member of the Senate temporarily, with effect from the 25th of June 2019, and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 25th day of June 2019. Honorable Senators, a senator is required to take the oath.
I, Anita Young, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I'm about to enter.
So we now move back, yeah? Yeah, we will now resume the debate. Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
No, we have a real debate.
Madam President, Madam President, I thank my colleague, Senator Haynes, for some light-hearted moments in the last 40 minutes. But to be serious, it was in his book published in 2012, the Night Watchman's Occurrence book, that V.S. Naipaul reprised something most of us would have heard when we were growing up. You do something silly or stupid, and someone of your parent look at you and ask you if dog eat your shame. I hope that is parliamentary, Madam President. Ask you if dog eat your shame. And it's a way of bringing you back to your senses.
Second, huh? Just 1 second. You see the crosstalk? Because somebody will indulge in the crosstalk and then somebody will respond and then somebody will be upset with it. Stop it now, please. Let the minister make his presentation. Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's a way of bringing you back to your senses. And I am so happy that we are all clear that in the context of dealing with crime, the principal instrument is the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. In numerous debates, I've pointed that out. In fact, I've warned my colleagues here that the matter of passing legislation falls to us, that the matter of implementation falls to principally the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I'm also heartened to hear all the support for the Commissioner of Police. In fact, last night I heard one of my colleagues on the opposite side describe the Commissioner as Super G. But Madam President, a few nights ago, we debated a piece of legislation called the Bail Amendment Bill. The Bail Amendment Bill. And it was on June 11, 2019, that the Commissioner of Police issued a press release in relation to the Bail Amendment Bill and the Firearms Bill, which we started yesterday. And the Commissioner of Police was saying to the population, and I suppose the legislators in particular, that he needs the Bail Amendment Bill. And when I look at the Hansard on that evening when we dealt with the Bail Amendment Bill, I see Wade Mark, no. Anita Haynes, no. Khadija Amin, no. Saddam Hussein, no. Taharqa Obika, no. And Sean Sobers, no. So, Madam President, my question is, how can you seriously come to this House not so long after that night and shamelessly advocate first on behalf of the Commissioner of Police and advocate secondly on behalf of the citizens of this country? You clearly lack shame. And if you had shame, dog has eaten it.
Oh my God.
And then, if you missed that June 11th press release, June 24, 2019, yesterday, the Commissioner of Police described in a release the Bail Amendment Bill as a critical tool and a strong deterrent in the fight against crime. If you've not lost your mind, you've clearly lost your shame. This is the police. This is the police service. None of us could go out there and fight crimes and criminals. This is the head of the police service, charged with the responsibility.
Senator Amin, this is the last time I'm cautioning anybody about the crosstalk. Last time. Continue, Minister.
This is the head of the police service, no less a person than the commissioner of police, saying to us as legislators, this is what we want. And 6 of you said no. I am waiting to see, as I warned you the night when we did the motion on the prison officers and their safety, I'm waiting to see what you will say to the commissioner on the firearms amendment bill. Because we are charged here with the responsibility primarily of crafting the tools that will allow law enforcement in the country to do what it believes it has to do in relation to the fight against crime. And, Madam President, this motion, notwithstanding all the, I can't describe it in the recitals, calls on the government to do one thing, and that is to lay the table a cogent strategic crime prevention plan to address the levels of crime. Well, Madam President, even before coming into government, the government set up the framework of a plan, and I know my friends will not readily read the PNM manifesto, but is a document of public policy. And no matter how much you whine and grind, you can't stray from the reality that the PNM's manifesto set out the 5 critical areas in relation to the fight against crime. And if I asked any one of you to give me an idea what are those 5 things, you may not be able to do so. Because to come and call for a plan to be laid tells me you haven't been following. You've been shooting in the dark. And no wonder you make these terrible errors in judgment. Imagine when the anti-gang, I've heard you talk about the anti-gang and nothing is happening with the anti-gang legislation. Why don't you talk about the public shaming that brought you back to the parliament to help the government pass the anti-gang legislation? Because that is what happened. You came to the parliament with no intention. Having gotten our support when you were in government, you came to the parliament with no intention of supporting anti-gang legislation. And when the bill failed, without your support, and the public turned on you, then in an unprecedented manner, you brought yourself back into the parliament. You assisted us by waiving the standing order that says that we cannot come back in less than 6 months. And in one of the shortest debates in the parliament on a piece of legislation so substantial in the lower house, there were 2 speakers and 2 speakers alone. The Honorable Attorney General who moved, and the leader of the opposition who spoke on behalf of the opposition. And thereafter, it ended. And of course, in this House, there were 29 votes for and none against. You were shamed by then. You were shamed into coming into the parliament and doing what is right. And it is for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who also asked for that piece of legislation, to take the steps using the tools provided not by us, the legislators, by we the people, we the taxpayers, by providing the tools that are required. And when you ask about a plan, the PNM, in its manifesto, set out the 6 key areas. Number 1, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. That was number 1, because we recognized the absence of leadership in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service had serious repercussions. The absence of leadership led to a position where the manpower of the police service was not targeted to the key areas of crime. Forget the numbers, forget whether we had the strength, the full strength. What we had in the police service was not directed in the areas that required action. And go back to your tenure, go back to your time in government, and you would see in the police service, at least 10% of the service was on leave, many on study leave. You would see in the critical crime fighting areas, less than 50% of the positions were filled. So in tackling the police service, the government recognized a few things. One, that it had to deal with the issue of leadership. And I don't know if you did it willingly, unwillingly, inadvertently, but a police commissioner is in place. And I don't know if you agree or disagree, but the public seems to feel that leadership exists in the police service in a manner that did not exist for several years before. And the government undertook a manpower audit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and laid the report in this House, pointing to serious technical deficiencies in the police service, pointing to serious issues in the public police service, in relation, for example, to the abuse of overtime, to hours, officers' hours not being accounted for, to training, and several other factors in relation to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So the government has not been blind to number one priority, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And most importantly, the government has listened to what the service is telling us in relation to the type of legislation that has to be brought. And I'll remind you very shortly. Number two was this issue of border protection. And thankfully, some of us have decent memories, because you seem to have forgotten what was the point of the OPVs. You seem to have forgotten that. And you talk, Senator Obika talks about a regional presence. Well, the OPVs were meant to do that. The OPVs were meant to allow law enforcement to stay offshore for long periods and to service territorial waters going right up to Puerto Rico. It was not a cheap investment, but it was an investment guided by all the technical people and a significant amount of effort and money. I don't know if you understand that there were about 200 officers through different periods of time sent abroad, particularly in England, for training, some living away from their families for a year, to be trained to operate the OPVs and all the supporting equipment on the OPVs. And all that investment went down the drain. So when you talk about border protection, consider what you left for us coming in. And consider what your dismantling of the OPVs has done in relation to border protection. And of course, what have we done? The government has ordered new vessels, and you have gone to the length and breadth to interfere with the work being done with the Australians. You have committed yourself to mischief, to try to find fault with the government's purchase of the vessels that are needed. We had 14 vessels, Coast Guard vessels that would support the larger vessels down in the west. They were unserviceable. Some were of no use. And those which were serviceable, the government has brought back into operation. Why don't you talk about the Augusta Westland helicopters? do you realize that among the many contractual commitments in relation to Augusta Westland is an expensive provision in the contract to train locals to take over the operation of those helicopters? And do you realize that you failed a simple thing as putting locals in place to be trained to take over the operation of Augusta Westland? You failed to do that. And what did we do? Well, we recognize, because none of you can come to this house and say to the country what those Augusta Westland helicopters did in relation to crime fighting. And this government, recognizing that we cannot afford it, we could not afford that, in as much as it may have been nice to have on some occasions. We could not have afforded it, grounded the fleet, and have decided to pursue other ways of providing support in the air for law enforcement on the ground. You talk about looking for the forensic center, going up to St. Augustine or St. Joseph and looking for the center. Why don't you go, Carlsonfield, and look for all your Ministry of Justice buildings that you were building down there? Why don't you do that? The government of Trinidad and Tobago has a commitment with the Chinese to support the establishment of the Forensic Science Center. We have other commitments in relation to the DNA lab, and we have other commitments in relation to the Forensic Science Center. Because if you walk to the Forensic Science Center, if you go in there, you can't point to anything in the form of equipment or personnel that you added during your 5-year term. You can't. Forensic Science Center did not even receive a coat of paint. And when you get into building, designing, working with international partners to identify the site, to acquire the site, to design, to build, it wouldn't happen overnight. But on the issue of improving what we called in the manifesto, improving police science, the government has addressed the issue of the DNA lab, forensics lab, and most importantly, after you passed the DNA legislation in 2011, what did you do? Absolutely nothing. So the government brought to this House the DNA regulations. The government has taken steps to hire the people who are required to give effect to the DNA legislation. And the government is moving. We've brought subsequent legislation dealing with DNA. The fourth area in the manifesto dealt with the judiciary. And every time we bring a piece of legislation in this parliament that remotely touches and concerns the judiciary, we have a whole set of bacchanal in relation to the judiciary. But we've brought our legislation. We've brought what has been asked from us by the judiciary, the things that they are required to do and to improve the way in which justice is managed, and I will get to some of that legislation soon. And then the fifth area, when you mention the prisons, there are two things that come to mind. That enormous expenditure to convert those Santa Rosa warehouses into something of a prison. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But I wanted, in the context, Senator Obika, of that plan you want to see appear before us, I wonder if you will do to that plan what you did to a report that you commissioned. Because I didn't hear you mention no time to quit, engaging youth at risk, that your government commissioned. And once you had it in hand, obviously you put it away to gather dust, because from 2013 to 2015, no one heard about that report. A very detailed report, but most importantly, a report that addressed the issue of the prisons. And it's not the only report. but it is a report commissioned by you. And nowhere you could show me that having commissioned and received a report like that, you did anything to implement the report. So my opening is to say to you, one, the government in its campaign articulated the elements of a plan to deal with crime. Nothing has changed. And throughout, from 2015 to now, we've been coming to this parliament, and we've been other places in the country, but I'm talking about the parliament now. We've been here dealing with the issue of crime. And this is what we've done. We laid gambling legislation. And that piece of legislation has sat in committee since it's been laid in 2016. But I asked you before, and I say to you now, I wait to see your attitude towards the gambling legislation, because you've not talked about what causes the crime and what is mingled in the crime. But I am on record as a writer and in this House as saying that crime and money and the greed are indivisible, and gambling, all the law enforcement reports point to a link between what is happening in the country in relation to illegal gambling and a link with crime and criminal behavior. So I want to see your attitude when that legislation eventually, because if something as obvious as bail, begged for by the Commissioner of Police, does not capture your support, I don't imagine you'll have an interest in stemming the multi-billion-dollar flow of illegal funds via gaming houses in this country. The SSA amendment, we brought that. You criticized, you focused on personalities. Well, if there was ever a personality emerging from the world of the SSA, is Rishmi. And you know, yes, because the mere fact that she could have been selected tells me something about the people who made that decision. And you have no shame. You have no shame about it. We brought whistleblower legislation. And what would whistleblowers do? Whistleblowers will alert somebody to the existence of crime and criminal behavior. And what was your attitude towards that legislation? When you reflect on it, why didn't you support, and why don't you support whistleblower legislation in this country? Why something so simple? You do not support legislation like that. We brought the cybercrime, recognizing, again, particularly as it relates to minors, and we have a report right now in the country, very live report, of somebody who is being sought in relation to an alleged incident in Siparia. And the cybercrime legislation continues to suffer in committee because there's no desire. There's no desire on your part to bring it to life.
Anticipation of a bill or motion, please.
Minister, yes, so Minister, can you move on, because those matters are still to come to...
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, this one is not to come. The trial by judge alone, which is now law. I remember my friends on the opposite side. I remember their attitude to that bill, that it would not work, that it would do nothing to the criminal justice system. And, of course, I thank them for their support. We went into a select committee and came out with a bill that was acceptable to the House. And, Madam President, upon proclamation, it didn't take very long. It didn't take very long for us to have the first trial by judge alone in this country. In 2018, Madam President, We brought the legislation to deal with the criminal division. And that is in relation to requests made by the judiciary, how the judiciary wanted the courts to be structured, how the judiciary said to us that this is going to ease the caseload, this is going to ease the case management, the criminal justice cases, and so on. And thank you very much.
So, honorable senators, we will suspend the sitting and return at 5 p.m. Minister of Agriculture, you've utilized 25 minutes of your speaking time.